Those who have promoted the prevailing social vision in which lags, gaps, or disparities to the detriment of black people are the fault of white people are trapped in the corollary that these lags, gaps, or disparities should disappear once those other people are constrained by civil rights and policies, civil rights laws and policies. But nothing of the sort has happened. White people bind themselves to behave better by passing civil rights laws, and black lives should improve. But nothing of the sort has happened, you argue.
In material terms, there has been some improvement, but that improvement began long before the civil rights laws were passed. From 1940 to 1960. 1940, 87% of black families in the United States were in poverty.
87%.
87. 1960, it's 47. So there's a decline of 40 percentage points in that 20-year period.
In a generation and a half.
Yeah,
say,
and this is before the welfare state comes in under Lyndon Johnson in the form of the war on poverty, the civil rights laws, and so forth. Now, over the next 20 years, from 60 to 80, the rate of poverty among black families goes down an additional 18%, which is fine, but it's the continuation of a pre-existing trend at a slightly lower rate. So it's not, and yet it's credited in the media and even in academia, it's credited usually to the civil rights laws and to the Johnson war on poverty. But of course, this was just a continuation of the previous trend. What really turned bad were the social degeneration that occurred over that period. I could go on for days about the social degeneration, but let me give you just one quick example. When I grew up in Harlem in the 40s and 50s, I never heard a gunshot. Now, I'm sure someone fired a gun somewhere in Harlem, but it was not such a pervasive thing that you had to hear it. You know, I have relatives in Washington. I asked them the same question. People in my generation.
Growing up in Washington, D.C.
Yes, and low-income black neighborhoods. Did you ever hear a gunshot when you were growing up? And the answer was no. I have relatives in North Carolina. I asked the same question. No. And now, you know, people in housing projects especially, they put kids, some of them, to bed in bathtubs so that they won't be hit by stray bullets in the night. That's the homicide rate in the years that I was growing up, and I was really quite lucky as I went through the research I discovered, being in the right place at the right time. The homicide victimization rate among black males in the decade of the 1940s declined by 18%. From 1950 to 1960, it declined another 22%. And then in the 1960s, when all these wonderful new ideas in the criminal justice system came in, all of that reversed, and it shot up 89% in one decade, wiping out all the progress of the two preceding decades. And you could run through a great number of other things. Children raised without two parents present. That was about 22% in 1960. One generation later, it was 67%, and it's gone up a little since then as well. And now the rate among whites is higher than it was among blacks in 1960. Right. So if you look at what actually happens in the wake of these wonderful sounding policies, you see disaster after disaster.
All right. So, very important question. Are the wonderful sounding policies simply irrelevant, beside the point, or do they actually play a role in these social pathologies?
It would be an incredible coincidence. But you see, and in fact, and I go into this in more detail in this second edition in the book. You see exactly the same pattern in Britain. And all the things that are, in fact, right down to riots in London, Manchester, and other cities, which read just like riots in Ferguson and Baltimore. And the things like, you know, race is not an issue because most of those people are white who are doing all of these things, right down to setting fire to police cars. So you see the same policies are brought in. And another thing that's very similar, and this gets into human capital again. People are saying, you know, poor people can't rise in America anymore. And the data that they use leave out immigrants. Immigrants come here with little more than the clothes on their back. Go in here and by the next generation, their kids are excelling in school, going off to leading colleges and into professions.
I don't believe you change hearts. I believe you change laws. You change allocation of resources. You change the way systems operate. You're not going to change every heart, but at the end of the day, we can do a whole lot to change some systems and create more opportunities for people who deserve to have them. Close quote. Is there anything in there that would lead to policies that might actually improve opportunities for African Americans?
Easiest question of all, no. And I noticed that Hillary Clinton and many of the people who support the welfare state, who incidentally, when they want to help black people, they want to help those black people who are doing something wrong. That is, rioters, ex-convicts. They want to stop the schools from disciplining black kids, males who misbehave in school. I don't hear them concerning themselves about the blacks who are the victims of the people who are doing wrong. One of the classic examples to me of few things that are going very well in the ghettos across the country, and that's some of the charter schools that have come in, where the public schools, the kids are just wiped out. I mean, the kids in those ghetto schools often are 2 or 3 years behind the national norms and all kinds of stuff. But in some of these ghetto schools, especially those run by the KIPP organization or by the Success
charter
Academy,
schools.
I'm sorry,
Right.
yes, charter schools in the ghetto.
Right.
Their kids are scoring at levels equal to, and in some cases better than, that in affluent suburbs where the kids come from families making 200 grand a year. And you would think, my God, this is something that ought to get a lot of attention. The welfare state supporters are fighting against charter schools. The NAACP is fighting against charter schools. The teachers' unions give a lot of money to politicians. They give money to the NAACP. Moreover, if you have people coming in with charter schools, then you don't have the local political ward heelers, as it were, controlling all these resources that they can use to reward their friends and punish their enemies. And so therefore they want control of the schools because the schools are a source of jobs. Whether or not the kids learn anything is not their concern. I think the most cynical thing you can find in American politics are those people who are making themselves big champions of blacks, and yet who are fighting against it. The one school, kind of schools, that are offering a way out of poverty for millions of black kids. Not only do charter schools educate kids from the very same ghetto neighborhoods, in many cases, and I believe in most cases, they educate them in the same buildings.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so you'll have the, like the public school 185, and they're on the first, second floor, and up on the third floor, there'll be the kids from the charter school. Of course, they don't usually build buildings for charter schools. I mean, it's too expensive. And the kids on the first three floors, are scoring down below the 10th percentile, and the kids in the third floor are scoring above the 80th and sometimes 90th percentile, and they're in the very same building. And they were not chosen by skimming the cream. They were chosen by lottery.
At a dire time in my life as a young man, I pawned my one suit in order to get money to be able to eat. After emerging from a pawn shop on the Lower East Side of New York, which was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood at the time, I went into a nearby eating place and ordered a knish and an orange soda. Many years later, I would eat at the Waldorf Astoria, in Parisian restaurants, and in the White House. But no meal ever topped that knish and orange soda. Close quote.
And none ever will.
And none ever will. How?
And I didn't sit there thinking about how somebody else, somewhere else, was eating in more opulent places, more high-toned meals, and so on. I was glad to have that knish and orange soda.
Well, you're answering my question, I suppose, because my question is, how is it that Tom Sowell, how is it that you went from a situation that was so dire that you had to pawn some clothes to eat, to becoming author of over a dozen books. I know you won't like this, but beloved figure. Every time we do a show with you and we you're a rock star. People just, what enabled you? Was it something you learned at home? How did you decide to work hard and develop the talents you had instead of messing around in politics? You could have become an activist and wasted your life by your own argument.
I didn't have any political talent, first of all. So that's, some politician said he wanted to sort of ease the pain of people in poverty. And he said, actually, the pain of poverty is what got many people out of poverty.